Welcome to Knock Talk. I'm your host, Wil'liam Hall, broadcasting to you live out of Kingsland, Texas, USA, with episode number 16, Matthew chapter 13, The Impossible Parables. This makes a fantastic talk just because it really does. Every time Rabbi Michael Skobac shows up, he's got a lot to say. Rabbi, coming from Canada, what part of Canada are you from, sir?
This is called Toronto.
Oh, you're in Toronto. Okay, cool.
Toronto, Ontario.
All right. Very, very good. Well, Rabbi, it has been another long week. I'm sure it has been for all of us here. Let me get to our screen up here. So, perfect. Oh, that was neat. Okay, very good. So, well, Matthew chapter 13. Rabbi, it has, you know what, listening to you and listening to how you each week, how you kind of go through each thing, and you really, all the different variable topics that you cover, it really, I've noticed that it's making me, and I'm sure everyone else, we're starting to pay attention to other things that we normally wouldn't actually give an ear to. And so I find things jumping off the pages more since we've started this broadcast, because you just, like I said, you typically talk about things that I had never expected to even be brought up. So I really want to thank you for that. So, well, without further ado, Rabbi Michael Skobac, how was your week?
Oh, it's been awesome. It's been very, very hectic and busy, but yeah, it's been good. Thank God.
Oh, man. I mean, glad to have you here. And you finished up your lecture in fine time.
And fine time for dining.
What was your topic tonight on your lecture?
Well, last week we covered 4,000 years of Jewish history in 1 hour. Tonight, we covered much more than that in 1 hour. Tonight we did life and afterlife. So we basically went from the creation of Adam and Eve all the way until after the Messianic age and the resurrection of the dead and the world to come. And it was really biting off a lot. And we did it in just a little bit over an hour. And so my prayer is that I'll be able to do Matthew 13 in less than 60 minutes.
You know what? I have faith in you because I've got something sticking in the way. Let me try to move this. Please don't collapse on me. I just realized the boom of the handle of my microphone was sticking up in your screen, and I don't like that. Let me see if I can adjust this a little bit. Yeah, but you've really been hitting it pretty well on time. Well, at your pace, Rabbi. Shall we begin?
Yeah, this is actually a hard chapter for me because this is the first time that I really feel totally inadequate to deal with the text, because it's the first time where, at least you get the impression that if you're not an insider, you're sort of out in the dark here. So I'm going to really have a much harder time tonight, and just we'll see where it takes us. As you had in your I guess your blurb announcing this tonight, you had the impossible or the difficult parables, and it's basically a chapter of parables, I guess. And so it begins by talking about Jesus who went out of the house and sat by the lake, and there are huge crowds that gathered around him. Now, I always want to point that out because we've mentioned before that, this hardly reflects Isaiah 53, telling us that the servant of the Lord is going to be despised and rejected by basically everybody. And so when you have someone who in every chapter has these huge crowds that follow him, he seems like a superstar in the Gospels and a person who's incredibly popular. So it's really hard to square this with the suffering servant of the Lord who is literally hated by everyone. And so what happens in this chapter is that he, because it's so crowded around him, he gets into a boat, seems to have to get away from the crowds. And he sits in the boat, and while all the people stood on the shore, he begins by telling them things in parables. So the first parable is the parable of the sower. At least that's what it's called in my version of the Bible. And he says, a farmer went out to sow his seed, and he was scattering the seed. Some of it fell on the path. The birds came and ate it up. Some fell on rocky places where it did not have much soil. It sprang up quickly because the soil was shallow. But when the sun came up, the plants were scorched and they withered because they had no root. Other seeds fell among the thorns, which grew up and choked the plants. Still other seeds fell on good soil, where it produced a crop 160 or 30 times what was sown. Whoever has ears, let them hear. Okay, so he tells this parable to this apparently these large crowds, but in verse 10, his disciples come to him and they say, "Well, why do you speak to the people in parables?" And apparently, this is not the first time he's done it, and so the disciples at this point are just curious why, whenever you speak to the masses, you speak mysteriously in these parables. So in verse 11, Jesus says, "Because the knowledge of the secrets of the kingdom of heaven have been given to you, but not to them. Whoever has will be given more, and they will have an abundance. But whoever does not have, even what they have will be taken away from them." So I personally find this very, very troubling, actually, and difficult to understand. I mean that if I was Jesus, it's an interesting thought experiment. But when I think about a great teacher, a great leader, I would have thought that Jesus would have tried to make things clearer to the people. That he should have made it clear to people why they should have accepted his authority. He doesn't ever seem to make a clear case as to why people should basically drop everything they're doing and follow him. So I think he has an obligation to make it clear to people exactly why they should follow him and why they should accept his authority. And secondly, if his teachings are about the kingdom, the coming kingdom, then he should make them clear, meaning that if he's coming to really teach about the kingdom, he should make it clear to people. And what you have here is a statement which really is the antithesis. He's basically saying that I'm speaking in parables so they won't understand, meaning he's saying to his disciples, I'm going to give it to you guys. As a matter of fact, if you go to Mark, I think it's chapter 6, I'm not mistaken, in Mark, he basically speaks about those inside and those outside. So the crowds are basically the outsiders, and they're not going to get it from me. I'm not going to really give it to them clearly. And Jesus says, but to the insiders, to you people, I'm going to actually convey the secrets of the kingdom of heaven. Now, many Christian commentaries, the way they handle this is to maintain that Jesus was basically teaching in such a way that worthy people would get what he's saying, and less worthy people would not get what he's saying. Mm-hmm. I think that's the way most of the commentaries that I consulted explain this, but that doesn't really seem to be the case. And I'll share 2 reasons why I think that's really mistaken. First of all, we see from the chapter here that his disciples themselves don't understand the parables. It's not as if the crowds are unenlightened, unspiritual people who don't get it, but his disciples are worthy and they're able to understand. Right. They don't understand it either, and he has to actually explain and reveal to the disciples what the parables mean. The second reason I think that this is not what's going on, meaning I don't think that it's a question of one size fits all. He's teaching everything to everyone the same, and those who get it will get it, those who won't get it won't get it. No. We see here that he's deliberately withholding the truth from the masses, and he only reveals the truth to his select few disciples. So the first reason I gave was that we see that he has to actually explain everything to his disciples. But secondly, when the disciples ask him, why is it that you speak to the crowds in parables? So Jesus says, to them I speak in parables, meaning that I'm speaking in parables in order that they should not understand the secrets which he will then reveal to his disciples, meaning that you see from the words of Jesus himself that he's not trying to tease out or weed out the worthy from the non-worthy. He's specifically keeping things secret from the masses. So I'm really bothered by this. I think that you would expect that someone would try to be clear about what they're trying to teach. And I think that what's interesting to me is that this passage can come back to bite those who try to use, those in the Christian world, who try to use rabbinic and midrashic and agadic material for Christological polemical purposes. We know that it's very common, going back already to the time of Nachmanides in the 13th century, that Christians would try to use the Talmudic literature and rabbinic literature to prove that the Jewish people are following the wrong religion, absurd as that sounds.
Right.
And I think that, if Jesus here is saying that his parables are intentionally mysterious so that the outsiders won't get it, well, that's exactly what Jews believe about the Midrashim. I mean, that Moshe Chaim Luzzatto, the Ramchal, who lived in the 18th century in Italy, he's born in Italy. So he writes that the Midrashim were intentionally written in an obscure and concealed way so that outsiders to the tradition, meaning not people who were not smart, but people who are basically not part of the world of Judaism, won't get these Midrashim. So basically what I'm trying to say here is that two can play this game. Mm-hmm. And, if in Christianity only the true believers understand the parables, I would say that Christians have a lot of, answering to do if they think they could claim to understand rabbinic parables that, again, were intentionally written so that outsiders won't understand them. So I just find this as an introduction to this whole chapter about the use of these parables to be disturbing, actually.
And it seems like even his disciples didn't actually understand them.
No, because they ask him. They say, "Explain it to us."
Right. Right after he says, "Now, see, this is another mild topic." Right after he says, "It has been given to you." I mean, because their eyes are open and they're using the Holy Spirit, whatever you want to call it. But he basically declared to them that you guys your ears are open and your eyes are open. And then they said, "Okay, good. Could you explain this one to us?" I mean, people may think I'm being extreme, but I don't know if was Jesus prophesying that they would, or did he say something and he was surprised when he found out they really didn't get it and he had to explain it to them anyway. I don't know.
Hard to know. Very hard to know.
Man.
And actually, we're going to go a level deeper with this in a minute.
Awesome.
So in verse 13, Jesus continues to explain the use of these parables. And he actually quotes now a passage in the book of Isaiah, chapter 6. And he says, "This is why I speak to them in parables." And he quotes, "Though seeing, they do not see. Though hearing, they do not understand or hear. In them is fulfilled the prophecy of Isaiah. You will be ever hearing, but never understanding. You will be ever seeing, but never perceiving. For this people's heart has become calloused. They hardly hear with their ears, and they have closed their eyes. Otherwise, they might see with their eyes, hear with their ears, understand with their hearts, and turn, and I would heal them." So the big problem here, and this actually comes up frequently in these fulfillment texts, is that this passage from Isaiah is not a prophecy about the future. Isaiah is simply describing the people of his generation and how they were spiritually thick and not getting his messages. The Hebrew is in the past tense, so he's not describing, giving some prophecy about what's going to happen in the future in 700 years at the time of the Messiah. It's basically here it's a passage from Isaiah being quoted out of context, which is actually quite common. And then Jesus goes on to say again to the disciples, "But blessed are your eyes because they can see, and your ears because they hear. For truly I say to you, many prophets and righteous people long to see what you see but did not see it, and to hear what you hear but did not hear it." Now, obviously, he's not talking about, hearing these parables and, that's what the righteous people didn't get a chance to do. It seems to me that what he's saying here is that since he's the Messiah, right, and all the prophets were predicting the coming of the Messiah but never got a chance to see it, so Jesus is saying to his disciples, you are fortunate because all these righteous people and prophets who were longing for and predicting, prophesying the coming of the Messiah never saw it come to be, but you are actually getting a chance to see it. One thing I should point out is that, again, and this has come up so many times already, that you see here that Jesus refers to people who are righteous people without having any knowledge of him. I mean, that these are people obviously in previous generations who didn't know one thing about Jesus, and yet they're able to be righteous, as opposed to Paul, who's constantly insisting that it is not possible for a person to be righteous. Now, I wanted to cite here a commentary to this passage from David Stern's Jewish New Testament commentary, where he writes that the implication here is that nothing inherent in the disciples to earn them the privilege of seeing what they are seeing. Meaning that the implication is that there is nothing inherent in the disciples to earn them the privilege of seeing what they are seeing. The prophets and the righteous people may have been more meritorious, but God reveals himself not on the basis of human merit, but only by his own sovereign will. And he actually goes on to cite Romans 9 and 1 Corinthians 1 as proof texts for this. But it seems to me that David Stern here is very much influenced by the Pauline doctrine of, first of all, predestination, and also the idea of, not being able to merit or deserve the good that comes to us. I think Paul actually says in Colossians that if we were able to receive our reward, so to speak, and salvation because we deserved it and earned it, then we come to boast. So Paul definitely insists that whatever good will come to us is not based upon our merit, but purely as an act of a free gift from God. I don't think that Jesus is saying this, and I think that it's clear to me that David Stern is sort of reading into this chapter of Matthew this very Pauline take on merit and worthiness, and whether or not people can receive from God based upon their deserving it. Certainly within Judaism and the Tanakh, for sure, we're always told that people will receive based upon whether they're righteous or not, whether they deserve it. And it's a mainstay of Jewish teaching that actually any gift that we get that we didn't work for, we don't enjoy, meaning that the Kabbalists speak about the bread of shame, that if we received redemption or salvation just as a handout, as welfare, as a pity payment, that's not something which is really a gift at all. The only thing we ever really value and take pleasure in life are those things that we worked for and we earned because we deserve it. But it is a strange passage, I think, in general. And then what happens in verse 18 is that the disciples want him to explain. Obviously they don't understand the parable. So Jesus says, listen to then what the parable of the sower means. When anyone hears the message about the kingdom and does not understand it, the evil one comes and snatches away that which was sown in their heart. This is the seed sown along the path. The seed falling on rocky ground refers to someone who hears the word and at once receives it with joy. But since they do not have root, they only last a short time. When trouble or persecution comes because of the word, they quickly fall away. The seed falling among the thorns refers to someone who hears the word, but the worries of this life and the deceitfulness of wealth choke the word, making it unfruitful. But the seed falling on good soil refers to someone who hears the word and understands it. This is the one who produces a crop yielding 160 or 30 times what was sown. So the first thing, again, I want to emphasize is that, if this is supposed to be a secret that Jesus is only revealing to his inner circle but conceals from the masses, if that's really what's been going on so far, so I wonder why the gospel writers spill the beans for the whole world to read. I think that
See what I mean? You pulling things out again I never even thought about.
You know what? I never thought about it either until I reread this chapter recently. But, what's going on here is that Jesus tells this mysterious parable to the masses. He doesn't explain it to them because he doesn't want them to understand it. Maybe because he thinks they won't understand it anyway. But his disciples, he explains the parable to them, but only to them. And so to me, it's strange that if this was not supposed to be revealed, this explanation to the rest of the world, that's exactly what the gospel writers are doing. So just something for all the Christians out there to ponder over their Shabbat tables. Now, I wonder, though, is there an implication here that non-believers like me won't be able to understand the parable even after reading the explanation here? I wonder if that's what they're assuming, meaning that are we supposed to be that thick that even the explanation we don't understand? So I'm not sure I would go that far. I mean, when I've studied the parables, and especially the commentaries of Christian explaining the parables, I don't find them to be particularly, impenetrable. I mean, I think that they're actually, on some level, quite simple. And the third thing I wanted to point out was, why would it be problematic for outsiders to hear this parable's explanation? I mean, what exactly is so sensitive in this message here?
What's the benefit from it?
Yeah, like what exactly, is so controversial or so dangerous for the public not to know and not to hear about? I will basically make the same observation with all the parables in this chapter. They don't seem terribly deep or controversial to me after they're explained, and especially after I read the explanation of many of the Christian commentaries who offer their take on what these things really mean. I just find them to be fairly simplistic, obvious. I don't think that in most cases they would have been at all controversial or earth-shattering,
or even confusing. To be honest,
well, they're certainly confusing. But again, after let's put it this way: maybe I don't understand the explanation that Jesus offers, but
I got you.
when I'm reading the explanation of 21st century and 20th century Christians who are writing for a general audience, I think I understand what they're saying.
Sure.
And I just don't seem to sense that there's anything that's earth-shattering or controversial or that's so mysterious here at the end of the day. So that will be a general observation I want to make about the parables, that I can't really see why there's a need to be so sensitive and keep this from those on the outside. I mean, it's interesting that the one thing that Jesus has said a number of times is to conceal his identity. Jesus has been saying, don't tell people I did these miracles. Don't tell people I'm the Messiah. And we'd understand why he would want that information to be kept secret, although it sort of was self-defeating to then do all these miracles in front of thousands of people if he wants to keep it hush-hush. But still, we would understand the motivation for keeping information like that secret, because had the word gotten out prematurely, the Romans would have certainly hunted him down and killed him. Again, I'm going to make that as a general observation in the parables here. I really don't get the controversy. Now, he goes on and tell them another parable, and we'll see from the context that this is not being told just to the disciples here. This is being told to the crowds. Continues to the crowds. The kingdom of heaven is like a man who sowed good seeds in the field. While everyone was sleeping, his enemy came and sowed weeds among the wheat and went away. When the wheat sprouted and formed heads, then the weeds also appeared. The owner's servants came to him and said, "Sir, didn't you sow good seed in your field? Where then did the weeds come from?" "An enemy did this," he replied. The servants asked him, "Do you want us to go and pull them up?" "No," he answered, "because while you are pulling the weeds, you may uproot the wheat with them. Let both grow together until the harvest. At that time, I will tell the harvesters, first collect the weeds and tie them to bundles to be burned, and then gather the wheat and bring it into my barn." So this is another parable he relayed to the crowds. And I'm wondering why he didn't just say nothing. Meaning, if he doesn't want them to understand this, then why tell them any parables at all? It seems like he's trying to taunt them in some ways with these parables that he refuses to explain.
Right.
I think a good teacher would patiently try to get them to understand. In the Talmud, Rav Preda we're told, explained a passage 400 times to a slow student. That's how patient we have to be with people who don't get it. And, I refuse to believe that these masses of people are all somehow insidious, evil, demonic people. They're just crowds. They're masses of people. And, if some of them don't understand why he's the Messiah or why they should just give him all of their attention, he really, I think, has a moral obligation as a teacher to explain to them. In verse 31, he goes on to the parables of the mustard seed and the yeast. He told them another parable. Again, this is to the masses. The kingdom of heaven is like a mustard seed, which a man took and planted in his field. Though it's the smallest of all seeds, yet when it grows, it's the largest of garden plants and becomes a tree, so that the birds come and perch in its branches. He told them another parable. The kingdom of heaven is like yeast that a woman took and mixed into about 60 pounds of flour until it worked all through the dough. Now, I saw that someone actually discussed something very interesting here, that many people assume that the first of the Gospels was Mark, and then Matthew and Luke sort of are working from Mark's original versions. So Mark here in chapter 4, verse 31, speaks about the sowing upon the ground. That's how Mark expresses it in this parable, that the mustard seed was sown upon the ground. When Matthew retells or reworks this narrative, he speaks about sowing the seed in a field. So he's sort of not just the generic ground, but it's in a field, whereas Luke in chapter 13:19 speaks about sowing these seeds in a garden. It's interesting. So the original version is in Mark, speaks about sowing these seeds in the ground. Matthew recasts it in terms of a field, and Luke in terms of a garden. Now, the reason this is interesting is that in the Talmud, actually it's in the Mishnah, Tractate Kilayim, chapter 3, Mishnah 2, teaches that it's prohibited to sow mustard seeds in a small patch of land or in a garden. So Luke, as we know, was probably not Jewish, and probably then unaware of this Jewish teaching. And so when he reworks or reframes the original story in Mark, he actually makes the mistake of having this parable about the mustard seed being planted in a garden. Whereas Matthew, who's probably more familiar with the traditional Jewish teachings, so he doesn't have the mistake of planting these mustard seeds in a garden, but he has them in a field, which should be larger than a garden. That's sort of a technical observation.
Interesting.
Now, what's the point of this parable, the mustard seed parable? Some commentaries say it's to teach us that something small can grow into a much bigger entity. Some Christian commentaries interpret this as saying that he's alluding here to the idea that non-Jews will be part of the Messianic kingdom in the future. So if that's the case, one thing you see is that it sort of goes against the grain of his previous teachings, which said he's only come for the lost sheep of the house of Israel, and that his disciples should not go to the Gentiles or the Samaritans. But secondly, it's not controversial, meaning that if the whole point of this parable is that, this small movement that he's now launching is going to ultimately explode even among Gentiles, that wasn't controversial. The Tanakh is constantly telling us exactly that. The Tanakh makes it clear that the Messianic age is not just for Jews, but that the impact of the Messianic reality is going to hit really the entire world. All people will come to the Messianic kingdom. All people, all humans will come to acknowledge and have a relationship with God. Zechariah goes to the extent of saying that all people, non-Jews, are going to come to Jerusalem and celebrate the festival of Sukkot. So this is certainly not controversial for him to be teaching that, the kingdom of God is going to include Gentiles. But that's how many Christian commentaries explain this parable. It mystifies me because it would not be something that would come as a shock to any Jews in the first century.
The storyline that comes to mind is when Peter has his vision in Acts. I think it's chapter 8 or whatever. And I've heard that chronologically that was about 10 years after the ascension. And if that message there was this is also should be a shock to Christianity just within itself, is that if that's true, then that means that when the entire time that Jesus was here, even after he died, that story would mean that not even after he died were Gentiles allowed to come into Christianity. It wasn't until after that moment when God told Peter, no longer call any man unclean. That's kind of the teaching, is it?
Well, but you already have in Matthew 28, the Great Commission, to go out and make disciples of the entire world.
Oh,
yeah. So it's the earlier chapters in the Gospels where you have this exclusive focus on Israel. I've only come for the lost sheep of the house of Israel, right? It's not proper to take the bread of the children and cast it to the dogs, Jesus says in Matthew 15. Don't go to the cities of the Samaritans of the Gentiles. I mean, the beginning of the gospel, it's very clear that Jesus is not focused beyond Israel, but you have these possible hints in these parables that he may be aiming for the whole world, and then explicitly revealed in Matthew 28. So again, but for some reason, Christian commentaries assume that this would somehow be a radical idea, where, to any normal Jew, this is exactly what they're expecting because the Tanakh teaches this. Mm-hmm. In verse 34, Jesus goes on, he spoke all these things to the crowd in parables. He did not say anything to them without a parable. So you see here, it's telling you he was never straight with the crowds. He was always being mysterious and speaking in parables. And he goes on to say, so was fulfilled what was spoken through the prophet. I will open my mouth in parables. I will utter things hidden since the creation of the world. Now, one thing I should point out, I think I mentioned this in the past, is that this whole strategy of his sort of runs head up against John 18:20. In John 18:20, Jesus says to the Romans that I've taught nothing in secret. Everything that I did was out in the open, full disclosure, totally transparent.
Oh my
gosh. That's what he tells the Romans. And yet here he's repeatedly telling his disciples that no, I am keeping things secret from the masses. I'm only teaching them in parables. And one of the reasons why that's a problem is because in Isaiah 53 we're told that the servant of the Lord will have no deceit in his mouth. So that would be something which is hard to square if he's telling the Romans that he was always honest and open and nothing was in secret, nothing was concealed, and yet he specifically tells his disciples, no, I'm concealing everything from the masses. So that's a problem, again, in terms of Isaiah 53. Secondly, this passage from Psalms, he's quoting a passage from Psalms here. He says, so was fulfilled what was spoken through the prophet. This psalm was not written by a prophet. First of all, the book of Psalms is not in the part of the Bible called Nevi'im, or prophets. It's the Ketuvim, it's the writings, which was not written through Nevuah, through prophecy.
Wow.
It was written through a lower level of revelation called the Ruach HaKodesh, the Holy Spirit. So obviously, he's using the word prophet here sort of loosely, but it's not technically the case. The author of this psalm was Asaph. And if you go to 2 Chronicles 29:30, Asaph is referred to as a chozeh, as a seer. So he's not a prophet, he is a seer. Now, what's I think very interesting is that if you go to Psalm 78, the context there is the exact opposite of what Jesus is doing, even though he quotes this psalm as a proof text, meaning that he's quoting this psalm saying that his speaking in parables is a fulfillment of this psalm. The problem is that in Psalm 78, the writer is saying that the reason he's teaching in parables is to make things clearer to people so that everyone is going to understand. Jesus is teaching in parables for the exact opposite reason, so that people won't understand, so they won't get it. So it's sort of quoting a very inappropriate psalm to back him up. And the other thing to point out is that the second half of the last verse does not exist in the actual psalm. So there's nothing in the book of Psalms about hidden since the creation of the world. So it's hard to say where the gospel writer got that.
Interesting.
So let's plow ahead.
Okay, very good.
Parable of the weeds explains. So now we have this parable of the weeds. You saw right before I came on the air tonight, I was eating my weeds. I had this incredible salad of organic spring mix, which looked like weeds to me. So he then he left the crowd. So that's what happens here. Previously he was with the crowds. In verse 36, he leaves the crowds. He goes into the house. His disciples came to him and said, "Explain to us the parable of the weeds in the field. We don't get it." So he answered, "The one who sowed the good seed is the Son of Man. The seed is the world, and the good seed stands for the people of the kingdom. The weeds are the people of the evil one, and the enemy who sows them is the devil. The harvest is the end of the age, and the harvesters are angels. As the weeds are pulled up and burned in the fire, so it will be at the end of the age. The Son of Man will send out his angels, and they will weed out his kingdom, everything that causes sin and all who do evil. They will throw them into the blazing furnace, where there will be weeping and gnashing of teeth. Then the righteous will shine like the sun in the kingdom of their Father. Whoever has ears, let them hear. So again, we pointed out before that it's obvious that without this explanation, the disciples themselves would not have understood this parable. So I'm going to ask again, what is the blockbuster point here? Is the point of this parable, at least the way it's explained by almost all the Christian commentaries I've consulted, is that in the kingdom, the righteous will be rewarded and the wicked will be punished. But I mean, is this such an unusual thing to teach? Is that really the big mystery here? So again, he sort of alludes here to the fact that the kingdom is not only going to be Israel, it's going to probably include more of the world. So he's sort of anticipating here Matthew 28. And when he speaks about the Son of Man sending out his angels, this seems to be a rather high view of Jesus. I think I mentioned earlier that, when we try to wrap our head around whether or not the first century Jews view Jesus as God, and are the gospel writers trying to make it clear to us that Jesus is God? So I think most of the references that we've covered so far would seem to mitigate against that interpretation. But here already you have some hinting that Jesus is not just some guy, because someone that's able to, send out angels seems to be not just some regular human being. So it's not clear whether this is trying to establish the divinity of Jesus, but certainly it has a pretty high view of who Jesus might have been. And then we go on in verse 44, the parables of the hidden treasures and the pearl. The kingdom he teaches, and now this is presumably only given to his disciples. He's with them in the house now. The kingdom of heaven is like the treasure hidden in a field. When a man found it, he hid it again. So someone found a treasure in a field, and he went and hid it. He didn't pick it up. And then in his joy, he went out and sold all that he had, so he was able to purchase the field. So it seems that, if I understand this correctly, it wasn't his field. He was someone that was sort of poking around in this field. He finds a huge treasure. So what does he do? He reburies it so that he can then go purchase the field and then get the treasure at the end. And then he says in verse 45, again, the kingdom of heaven is like a merchant looking for fine pearls. When he found one of great value, he went away and sold everything he had and bought it. So again, I asked the question, what's the big secret here? That the kingdom is precious? Is that really what we're learning here? And is that so mysterious that no one else could hear this but the inner circle? I think it's pretty clear from anyone who studies the Tanakh that the kingdom of God is going to be a precious time in history. Now, the first of these parables is probably a case of very serious dishonesty. I mean, if you find a treasure in a field, you don't own it. Even if you find it,
Yeah, I was wondering when we're getting to that.
it belongs to the owner of the field. As a matter of fact, even if you want to say finders, keepers, losers, weepers, the Talmud and rabbinic literature have a very, very different take on something like this. There's a famous story where an Arab sold a camel or a donkey to Shimon ben Shetach, one of the great sages. And when Shimon ben Shetach took possession of the animal, he saw in the saddlebags was a very, very precious jewel. So he could have obviously, kept it. The guy sold him the animal, and now he's got everything.
Right.
But he took the jewel and he ran back to this merchant, and he said, "No, I bought a donkey. I didn't buy a jewel." And this person, was so thankful. He started just screaming out, "Blessed be the God of Shimon ben Shetach." So anyone that finds something that someone else, wasn't aware that they had, really you have a moral obligation not to try and keep it for yourself, but to return it to the owner.
It kind of makes you wonder what exactly. I know again this sounds tacky, but what kind of mind that Jesus was working with himself? Because I mean, here's one thing for sure. One time I was at Walmart, and I know a lot of people will do this. There was somebody had dropped $100 bill out of their wallet, and was like three people in front of me. And then I was waiting to see because there was two other people who actually saw it, and they were staring at it, and I wasn't about to touch it, but I was just watching them. And finally, this little girl walks up to it and grabs this thing, and she picks it up and hands it to the guy across the counter and says, "I think somebody dropped this thing." Now, chances are the guy behind the counter just went out and had a nice dinner, but the girl is where the focus is.
Good for her.
And the point of that is, I mean, isn't that what we would do? I mean, if I went out and I found something that obviously, should belong to somebody, especially if it's buried. That means somebody else buried it. It's like going up and digging up a squirrel's nut that he just buried. That's kind of mean.
Yeah, there was a case. This happened recently. There was a story, I think, in Ottawa, where a rabbi purchased a desk online, a used desk. Probably paid like $25 for it. When he found the desk, inside one of the drawers was like, I think, $75,000, some huge amount of money. And so he spent a tremendous amount of time trying to track down the original owners to return the money. But that's really what we're supposed to do. And, even if someone can make the claim that, well, they're not technically required to, the rabbis always taught that Jerusalem was destroyed because Jewish people at the time insisted on living according to the letter of the law and not going beyond the letter of the law. So within the Jewish tradition, really required to always go beyond just simply the letter of the law. Mm-hmm. Now, the other parable here where, the person realizes the great value of the kingdom, that's a very, very popular teaching within the Torah itself. For example, in Ethics of the Fathers, I think it's chapter 6, you see that someone offered Yossi ben Kisma a huge fortune, all the money in the world, if he would move to their city. And it turned out that it was not really a city where there were serious Torah students, but they wanted to have a great scholar living in their midst. So he says to them, I wouldn't take all the money in the world to move to a city that wasn't a place of Torah. So this is obviously a very, very central teaching in Judaism and the Torah, that anything that's of eternal value there's no price to it. And so again, if that's really the point of these parables, that the kingdom of God, is something that's precious, I would say, really? I mean, of course. Mm-hmm. And so why keep this secret from the masses? And, why is it something that's so mysterious? You have to teach it in parables. There doesn't seem to be much of a, secret here. And then in verse 47, once again, the kingdom of heaven is like a net that was let down into the lake and caught all kinds of fish. When it was full, the fishermen pulled it up to the shore. Then they sat down and collected the good fish in baskets, but threw the bad away. This is how it will be at the end of the age. The angels will come and separate the wicked from the righteous and throw them into the blazing furnace, where there'll be weeping and gnashing of teeth. Have you understood all these things? Jesus asked. Yes, they replied. He said to them, therefore, every teacher of the law who has become a disciple in the kingdom of heaven is like the owner of a house who brings out of his storeroom new treasures as well as old. So again, this parable sounds pretty much exactly like the parable about the wheat and the weeds, that in the kingdom age of the kingdom of God, there'll be reward for the righteous, there'll be punishment for the wicked. And again, I don't really see the controversy here.
Mm-hmm.
Some Christians interpret this parable to mean that the responsibility of the disciples is to be like, he says all the way early in Matthew, follow me, I'll make you the fishers of men. That the disciples are really to catch as many fish as possible, but the ferreting out of which fish are worthy and which fish are not worthy can only be discerned by angels. That's how some people understood this this parable. And then the end of the chapter, no more parables. When Jesus in verse 53 has finished the parables, he moved on from there. He came to his hometown and he began teaching the people in their synagogues, and they were amazed. Where did this man get this wisdom and these miraculous powers? They asked. Isn't this the carpenter's son? Isn't his mother's name Mary? And aren't his brothers James, Joseph, Simon, and Judas? Aren't all his sisters here with us? Where then did this man get all these things? And they took offense at him. But Jesus said to them, a prophet is not without honor except in his own town and in his own home. And he did not do many miracles there because of their lack of faith. So just a few observations. Number one, it's pretty clear that, in the chapter or two ago, it kept on talking about how the Pharisees and the scribes, were plotting to kill him and to finish him off and do him in. It's pretty clear here that there's no rabbinic hit list out on Jesus. There's no hit squad out on him, because he's able to very easily walk into the synagogues and preach and even get a pretty positive reaction. So it's very hard to really accept at face value those earlier claims that there were all these people that were trying to knock him off. Now, it's pretty clear that the only people that would have found him brilliant and exceptional would have been simple people, ignorant people, who could have been very easily swayed and dazzled by him. But it's very clear, and we know this from the whole context of the first century in the Gospels, that the learned people, the scholars, the scribes, the Pharisees, the teachers, they didn't really see anything special about him or his teaching. Now, what's also hard to understand is, it says that the people were amazed, they were blown away by how brilliant he was and all his powers, and then they took offense at him. So it's not really clear what that's all about. What's so offensive? I mean, I don't think they were. There's any reason for them to have been offended by someone who is so brilliant and smart. It doesn't say what offended them. Just sort of coming out of the blue. It's almost like a non sequitur.
Kind of get the idea that they became prideful because he knew so much more than they did. Maybe that was the offense that they were.
It's possible, but it doesn't. Usually people like that are not going to express so much admiration at first.
That's a good point.
So anyway, it's hard to understand that. Now, it says that he didn't do miracles there because of their lack of faith. Now, it's not clear. Does it mean that he wasn't able to do miracles because of the lack of faith, or that he wouldn't do the miracles? So if you go to Mark chapter 6, verse 5, there it tells you that he wasn't able to. He could not. Not that he would not, but that he could not do miracles there because of the lack of faith. So the question that it raises is, does this imply that he only does miracles for those who already believe in him? I mean, that if he's not able to, or even if he won't do miracles for non-believers, that seems to mean that he only does miracles for people who already believe in him. The question is, but what would get these people to believe in him without him having done miracles? Meaning, It's almost like a chicken and an egg story. I mean, that the Gospels try to paint the picture that the miracles that Jesus did sort of confirm who he claimed to be. But without the miracles, what would the confirmation be? Now, we've already seen that it's very clear miracles don't prove anything in either Christianity or Judaism, but at least on the surface, that seems to be his major calling card. Look, I could do these miracles, then take me seriously. But the question is, without these miracles, why should anyone take him seriously? Meaning that if he's only doing miracles for people who believe in him, how do they come to the original faith in him?
Right.
And if they already believed in him, what's the purpose of the miracles? Meaning that if he's only doing miracles for the people who already believe in him, for what purpose? Why does he have to do miracles for these people? So you could say to reinforce their faith, but it's not clear why that's so important. So I'm left at the end of this chapter with more questions than answers.
Sure.
And I think that takes us to the end of the hour there, my friend William.
It sure does. Hey, one question for you. Do you think that this very last part where he, let me just put it up on the screen again so I can read it. It says, where'd it go? Oh, where it says that they were totally amazed at his wisdom.
Right.
Well, if he spoke in parables where they couldn't understand, but only his disciples, how did they call that wisdom?
Well, sometimes, it's interesting. We live in a world today where people are often attracted to the bizarre and the, sort of the obscure. So you have many people. I'll give you an example. Today Kabbalah is very, very popular. Kabbalah is very, very mystical. It's very difficult to understand, and yet you have people that they're attracted to it, they admire it, they're partly even though they really have no clue as to what it means. So I'm not so surprised to see people that have an admiration for someone who's speaking over their heads, because they may sort of assume that his parables must be profound because they don't get it. But the truth is that I don't know if he only spoke in parables. It seems that what it's saying is that when he addressed the crowds of people, he only addressed them using parables. But it could have been that when he came into the synagogue and he was preaching, maybe he had offhand conversations with people. There may have been other reasons why they may have asked him questions that he answered in a way that led them to believe he was very special. We do have a story in the Gospels where Jesus, when he's a little kid, gets lost when his family's in Jerusalem, and they come and they see him with the elders and the temple, and he seems to be debating them, with great skill. So there may have been reasons why they assumed that he was very brilliant and smart. I mean, there's an expression in Yiddish. They say the oilim is a goyim. I mean that the masses of people are very easy to bamboozle and to impress. And so when I give a lecture, I will interpret the reaction based upon who's giving it. If someone who I think understands, something about the topic, thanks me and says that they really appreciated what I said, I'll take that a lot more seriously than someone who really, I think, doesn't really know much about the topic and really wouldn't know a good presentation from a poor presentation. So I think that's what you see in the Gospels, that the people who are in the know and people who are wise and have knowledge don't seem to be very impressed with Jesus. He may have been charismatic. He may have even been able to give a decent lesson. But, among the Jewish people, good teachers are a dime a dozen. To be exceptional, to be someone like Hillel or Rabbi Akiva, you didn't get to be that overnight. And there's just no evidence that Jesus was operating on that kind of level.
Wow. Well, you know what? You did it again. Even with the extra explanations, you still nailed it within the hour. Rabbi, it's always fun. I so look forward to seeing you again next week. So until then, thank you for this wonderful explanation of Matthew chapter 13. And so, folks, be sure to tune in next week, same time, same place, for another episode with our beloved Rabbi. And until next week, shalom, 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 and we will see you soon.
Same bat time, same bat station.
Amen.
חשוב מכל חשוב והכרחי להיות ביחד. איפוק זו העוצמה, ויתור זו הגדולה, השאיפה והכמיהה.